Hello and welcome to another episode of the RevRx podcast, where we discuss how to thrive in faith, family, and health. My name is Chad Potts, and I'm your host. Today's special guest, Anna McLaughlin, tells her powerful story of how she went from successful lawyer, living the American dream, to realizing that success out in the world doesn't matter near as much as success at home does. And so what she had the faith and the courage to do was to actually leave her job as a lawyer to become a stay-at-home mom. She's now a homeschool entrepreneur, as she calls herself. She has 4 children, and her life is radically different than how she once envisioned it, but it's much more rich. And she's equipping people to make those same decisions today, not necessarily to quit your job, but to pursue the life that you want and the life that you feel like that the Lord is leading you to live. You see, a lot of times in life, we start going down this path and this forward trajectory, and we feel stuck in that. But Anna brings us a message of hope today, that no matter where you are in your journey, if you're not living a life of joy, and if you feel like God's calling you a different direction, then trust in Him and take that next step to live your very best life. What we see is that we serve a God who is with us every step of our journey. And we serve a God who sometimes calls us to make difficult decisions in life in order to reach our full potential and in order to become the thriving men and women He's called us and created us to be. So you're going to love this story. Hang on tight. We talk about finding what you want in life and creating the action steps to get there. We talk about the 4 major career paths we can take in life. We talk about homeschooling. We talk about how important it is to recognize the gifts in our children and really work to help them discover those and hone those skills. And we talk about the power of no to create the life that we're after. And so I'm so excited to introduce to you this week my friend, Anna McLaughlin. Thank you, Anna, for joining us today on the RevRx podcast. What a privilege this is to have you here on the show.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
We're very much aligned in a lot of different areas. But I'd just love for my listeners to get to know you a little better. Can you tell us a little bit about your story and how you kind of landed in the place that you are today?
Absolutely. So I like to say I'm a recovering lawyer. I practiced for 5.5 years in corporate law and had always been really just a perfectionist, a hard driver. And then in 2012, our firstborn came along and kind of just rocked our world. So everything changed with her. And we started asking the question, how can I get home? How can I be more present? We built a life that really felt like we were serving other people's dreams and goals. And we just didn't have a lot of time together as a family. So that was the beginning of the journey. Over the years, we have started going all in on entrepreneurship because we realized that's where we really have the flexibility that we need to be able to do what we feel called to do. And then now, 12 years into this journey, we have several businesses, we do investments, and then we've been homeschooling our children for the past 8 or 9 years now. So life is a lot smaller in many ways, but much richer as well.
Smaller but richer. Isn't that a fantastic goal for most of us, right? Yeah. There's this hustle culture that many are a part of, right? And so smaller but richer is really different than the mainstream culture, right? Constantly on the run. We're sacrificing family dinners. We're trying to, take care of the kids, make sure they're not missing out on anything. We've got careers, we've got activities, we've got hobbies. And so a lot of what you're saying is appealing because I've talked to a lot of people who really just desire to slow down. And we're just not really sure where to start. And so you'd mentioned when your first child was born, that the phrase you used with me before we jumped on here is that your heart was at home.
Yes.
Can you delve into that a little bit? And then really kind of what were some of those first steps? Because that was kind of a high view of what happened, but what were kind of some of those first steps of what you put into place to change the way that you guys did life?
Yeah. So what I knew when my daughter was born was that I didn't want to leave her. That was the only thing I had. And my husband kept asking, yeah, but what do you want? I'd gone to a top 20 law school, graduated with high honors. And one of the sneaky little things that our culture tells us is that, especially for women, we almost have this gender-oriented obligation that if we're bright, if we're competent, we have to go out and like carve a path for other women to follow.
Wow.
And I remember I was working with some professors that were more in the academia side of things. And when they found out I was going to work at just a law firm, quote unquote, they were like, what a waste. And I heard that phrase again when I thought of leaving for home. What a waste. Here you got this big degree. You spent a lot of money to get it, you know, and invested so much time and effort in all this work in honing my brain. And then I'm going to give it to a baby. Like it was seen as such really just tossing my gifts away.
Yeah.
And so the first thing that I really had to reckon with was, is that a waste actually? And if we look at the scriptures, we find out that actually it's just the opposite. The only eternal thing that we can set our hands to is the work of souls. Wow. And so I remember sitting in the law firm and looking around at these deals that filled full, they would put them in binders when they were finished, all the key documents, because I did corporate law, so mergers and acquisitions. And these deals that were 5, 10, 15, 20 years old, gathering dust, nobody cared about them. Nothing was really created or transformed as far as the people who, when I put my hand to a document and then the deal's over, it's not a part of me anymore. And then I look at my daughter and I'm like, she lives forever.
Yeah.
Forever and ever, right?
Wow.
And then it's not just her, it's the generations beyond. So being a first generation Christian in my family, I had ancestors that were believers, and then my dad came to the Lord later in his life. But in my growing up years, it was just me and the Lord. And to realize, like, the work I do to turn this ship around, to help right, where it's not just me that's a believer, but my children know the Lord, and then their children, and then beyond. That takes time. Yeah. And it's time worth investing. So getting back to your second piece of the question of like, what were the steps? The first thing was answering the question, what do you really want? And this is where coaching changed my life. It was maternity leave of we have 4 children, not to cut the other 3 out, but they just weren't there at that time.
Right. They're important too.
They're important too. But so it's just, here I've got a newborn. And I'm literally like crying almost every day going, I don't want to leave her. I don't want to leave her. And I didn't know what to do. So I hired a life coach because in my mind, I was like, well, I have to do something because I was earning about 3/4 of our family's income. So surely I have to do something. And then the life coach asked me one question that changed my life. She said, what is your perfect day? She just had me do an exercise describing my perfect day. Seemed like such a simple question. But through the course of that perfect day, I remember telling her, well, it must be a weekend because we're waking up without an alarm clock. Nobody needs to go anywhere. But what that exercise made me realize in talking to her was, this is actually the life I want. A life of ease, a life of connectedness, a life of a lot of time together, a life of investing in the souls of the people rather than having another to do and another to do. And so from that space, then it just became a question of how do we do our little bit day in and day out to make that result come about? Really for us, the first step was we needed to expand our income and decrease our time working, right? And so I happened upon a book while in this season of going, what can I do differently? What can I do differently? And it was called Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. Have you come across it?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Good stuff.
Good stuff. At the time, revolutionary stuff, because what he describes is that there are 4 ways to earn an income. We can be employed by someone else, which is what the vast majority of us are. That's anytime you get a W-2. We can be self-employed, and that's kind of the end result of any time that you can grow in a profession to become either the business owner who's still working in the business. So like a plumber or a electrician. Doctors and lawyers, once they reach partnership status, they own the business, but they still work in the business. Right. But you only get paid for what you work. And so your earnings are capped. So then there's the flip side of it where you become an investor. So that's real estate, that's the stock market, that's, all kinds of things, that commodities, things I don't know anything about still to this day. That's okay. You don't need to know it all.
That's right. Pick and choose.
That's right. And then you can also be a business owner where you own a portion of the business, but you are not actually working the business. And so direct sales can be an example of that. That's more leveraged income where you're still working a little bit, but your income per hour can expand just massively by a massive scale because you also own a portion of other people's businesses.
Right.
You build a team, things like that. And so this book kind of lit me up because I was like, the end of my journey as a lawyer is at best I'm self-employed, where I'm still going in every day and I'm governed by this work. So making that realization was the first step. And then from there, just piece by piece, inch by inch, we started looking into real estate investment. I got involved in direct sales, and it took some time to unring the bell. We had to be willing to make a lot of changes as far as our expenditures level, the things that we were doing for fun. You know, we stopped kind of taking, I'm just going to go buy shoes just to like take the edge off at the end of the day.
Right. Lifestyle changes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I started getting really clear on every time I do that, I'm stealing from our future. I'm stealing from the life we really want. So I let it get really big. So it took a while. It took us about 2 years, which actually is less time than I think would typically happen. But thankfully, my husband and I already were a little bit more bent towards living below our means.
Yeah, good.
And then in January of 2014, that's when we brought me home, and we really started going all in on this investing and all of that kind of stuff. So that's a little bit about our backstory and kind of how we've made the change.
Yeah.
But it's continued to this day. Okay, what do we need to do different? Because we kept having kids. They all cost some money. So we've just continued this work. But I think the first thing was, and the most important, is to get truly clear on what do we really want? What do we value? Because once we know where we're going, then we can really put our hand to the oar and work with a lot more power and precision.
Yeah, that's really clear and really helpful. And there's this concept of, at some point, you no longer have to just exchange time for dollars. There are better ways out there, and that's not necessarily the point of this. We may have to bring you on for a part 2 to delve a little deeper into that, but I think that's a good take home. You don't have to just exchange time for money. There are other options out there for investing, and different passive income levels that you can reach, and get creative. In other words, never stop learning, because that's another thing you had to do, right? So, like, you've gone through school, you've got your JD. You're at the top of your game. You spend all this money. You're practicing law, and everything there is to know about law. You know what? But you never stop learning, because you're like, all right, let's shift gears. Now, what do I need to learn in order to make the life that I want? And you had to say, okay, this is uncomfortable for me. This is hard for me, but it's worth it because of what we value and because of what we want. So I love that about your story. And I would just advise any listeners out there, hey, if you're not content with the life that you have, there are options. And Anna's story is evidence that can work out.
Yeah. Oh, and you just reminded me, Chad, of such a good point that's related to that before we move on to something else, which is I had no faith that this was possible. I would tell anyone who would listen to me, which the list got shorter and shorter the more I talked, because they were like, come on, like, for the love, can we do something else for lunch, right? But I would tell them I could never leave my job, and I would make sure they knew, my husband, he'd done the white collar job. He'd worked in insurance. He hated it. And so at that time he was working in like a technical job. He was doing CAT scans and x-rays for the hospital, which he enjoyed, but it didn't pay in the same way that law paid. So I would let everybody know, hey, I earn 3/4 of our salary, which I'm sure he appreciated so much that I would make sure everybody knew that.
Sure.
But it just underlined the impossibility that I felt that we were facing. And the Lord gave me this directive. Literally, I felt like it wasn't an audible voice, but it was like a shutdown that just I heard in my spirit. That's it. Like, never again are you to say, I could never leave my job. And he said, there was this sense of reassurance of like, I know you don't believe that this is possible, but flip it to a question. What if I could? And then all of a sudden, and this is a coach, Chad, and for those of you guys that have received coaching, right? That question, our brain always seeks an answer when we ask it a question. Yep. So when we say, what if I could? All of a sudden, I was solving the problem. And
Yes.
then I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Just happened to pull it off the shelf because it was purple. And I was like, what is with the purple? That looks fun.
I wonder if he did that on purpose.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. Purple and yellow, yes. There is no mistake there.
Yeah, purple's going to get them. And, the flip side of that is true as well. If we say, I can't do that, our brain is going to go look for evidence for that as well.
Yes, it is.
And so there's a lot of power in that, flipping that around, and saying, well, what if I can? You're going to look for evidence for that. And I love how in tune with the Lord that you kind of stayed in this, because it kind of started, it sounds like, as a desire of your heart. To which I will say, pay attention to the desires of your heart. A lot of times the Lord plants that seed that way, and we don't see how that's going to end up. All we know is that we have this strong desire that will not go away. It's not some, I'm going to go out on a whim and do something crazy, but it's this desire that won't go away. And so, if we're convinced that the Lord has put that in us, then there's that concept of, okay, I trust Him to work that out. So how can I line up with Him the best I can in order to see the path? And a lot of times the path is not well laid out, right? It's like next step.
That's right.
And God didn't come to you in a dream, which that'd be great if He did, and say, here's the 12-step process you're going to take to stay at home. Mm-hmm. It took having a little bit of faith in that next step, and then having a little bit of faith in that next step. And so I love that about your story. I want to switch gears a little bit to homeschooling. So a lot of people I talk to, they're considering maybe homeschooling, but they're hesitant. Hesitant maybe for a lot of different reasons, but the biggest reason I see is people tell me I could never homeschool my kids. And whether that be from a standpoint of I didn't like school then, I sure don't like the idea of getting back in it now, or whether that be the concept of, I didn't do that great in school, so I'm not smart enough to teach my kids, or whatever the case is. My wife was homeschooled. We understand the value that brings and the flexibility that brings. I'll be honest, when I grew up, I was friends with a couple of homeschool kids, and can I say this? They were always the weird kids.
I was like, weird. That's what's coming out. That's what I thought too. Yeah. And now I'm raising the weird kids.
That's right. But I married one. And there's nothing innately weird about that at all. And I'm seeing a shift. Like, I'm seeing a shift of that being more normal. But I do see that hesitation. What would be your advice to people who are maybe thinking about that, maybe feel drawn towards that? And it's not a knock on the school system or anything like that, but it's just, hey, I want more time with my kids, but I'm hesitant. I don't want to commit to that. What would be your advice to those?
Yeah. So it's going to come to a similar question of why do you want to homeschool? Yeah. Right? That's the first question. Like, what is calling you to feel like, oh, what if? Wouldn't that be, And so getting really clear on what it is. For example, I connected with a woman who she was not a believer. And for her, the big hang up around homeschool was, well, I want him to be the smartest kid that he can possibly be in exactly she essentially wanted a child that was a product of the private school system. I want him to know every language, and I want him to have every opportunity. I want him to do all these things. And then I want him to go to the best schools. And so she basically wanted him to follow the track of a traditional school system. I was like, well, put him in traditional school. Like, if that's what you want,
right.
That's what you'll get when if you want a traditional smart kid, that's what you're going to get.
It's predictable.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but unless there's a compelling reason the other direction, which for her, the other things were so important that she was having a hard time finding the value in staying home. So then it's, then the answer is right there. If you're saying things like, I want more time with my children, I really want them to know the faith that has enriched my life so much. And I don't want to kind of leave it to chance to, like, which teachers does he happen to get, even in a Christian school or whatnot. I want him to think critically. I want him to have freedom to explore the things that he really wants. If we're saying those things, then we actually can't assume that a traditional model is going to get us there, because it's not built for that.
Right.
Yeah. Rockefeller built the public school system with the intention of building workers. That was the design. And so the winners in a public school system are quiet and compliant And they're basically mini professors, finding it very interesting to think through issues and then spitting back out the concepts and theories that they've been taught through the books that have been selected for them. I wanted time with my children, a lot of time. They think too much time probably, but I wanted a lot of time with my kids.
Right.
And then the big thing for my husband and I, the faith piece was important, but almost more so as an expression of our faith in the unique way that the Lord has gifted us and has bent us. We had both gone on these career trajectories that had led us far astray from what we really, really loved doing.
Right.
And we felt a little bit like the school system didn't really offer the tools for, first of all, financial stewardship. How do I take care of what I've been given? Because it's not about how much I earn, it's about how much I keep, right? And what I do with what I keep.
Yep.
And then second of all, helping us know who we really are and therefore what we will excel at and love.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so for us, and I think that really when people are looking at homeschooling, a lot of them are drawn to it for this reason. We all have God's fingerprint on us, and we were brought into this world for such a time as this to do a particular work based on our nature, based on our skills, based on where we live, what our family looks like. And so that's reality. And we kind of know that as parents, but then where we get off base is we think we're living in two dimensions at the same time. So we recognize that there's this unearthing that needs to happen. But then we still think that we can't homeschool because we think we have to put that stuff in our children. Like I have to give them something to help them become who they are. And that's not our job. We're unearthers.
Yeah.
We're these mirrors. And so my work with my children, yes, I give them the math curriculum and I give them we do a classical model. So I give them the work that's related to our curriculum for that, which is a lot of history and grammar and Latin and things like that. But my primary job, in my view, is to say, I see this in you. Does that resonate? Do you see this in you? Do you like doing this type of thing?
Sure.
And so my children will tell me, I've got an artist who's got an entrepreneurial bent big time. Like she's always creating, crafting, and then she wants to sell it.
I love it.
So I've got one of those. I've got a sports guy, but he loves to talk. So he's like a sports announcer, data analyst. Yeah. I've got one that's a nurturer that can identify the emotions of other people like nobody's business, even in the movies we watch and the faces of the pets. That one looks sad, Mom. And she wants to be a pet sitter right now. We'll see. Dogs. That'll be something with dogs. And then I've got a scientist and he's 6 years old and he'll tell you, I think I want to be a scientist. Mommy, what if I want to be a geologist? What if I want to be a botanist? And so the vast majority of our school is actually helping them identify what do you need to be incredibly faithful there, right? And so once we've done that, a lot of my work is just exposing them to the opportunities that they need. Yeah. And I'm not filling an empty vessel. I'm helping them unearth their identity.
Yeah. I think there's just this fear that, we can't fill them with what we don't have. And that's not really the job. The job is to, show them who they are and give them the ability to grow in that. And, you're so right because, I'm a product of public school and many, many wonderful teachers, many, many wonderful mentors that I've met all along the way, and this is no reflection of them whatsoever, but I graduated. I'm similar to you. I graduated with my PharmD, theoretically knew all I needed to know about pharmacy. And, that's great, but how well equipped was I for life in general? And so, finding, there were things I was interested in all along the way, but it's almost like, all right, you're interested in that? Cool. Next. There was no nurturing of those gifts. And so now, here I am. I just turned 40 this year and I'm learning new things like what you were talking about because I'm trying to figure out, okay, well, what brings me the most satisfaction and joy out of life? And joy is kind of a buzzword. But as a Christian, joy is, a big part of what we do. And I noticed on your social media, you have this phrase that you like to equip people to live a life of joy. Can you delve into that just a little bit? What does that look like to you? And maybe how can others find that? Because I think that's what we're looking for A lot of times we say we're looking for happiness. Well, happiness is dependent on circumstances. What we're really looking for is joy. And so how does that relate to what you're doing?
Yes. So the first, again, we recognize it's possible, right?
Uh-huh.
Like Paul talks about, no matter what, in every circumstance, I've learned to be content.
Yep.
Right. And contentment, I think, is really the gateway into joy, because we can't really operate in joy if we're not willing to accept things as they are.
Sure.
But once we're there, where we're like, okay, there's a no matter what opportunity here, then it becomes a question of like, how do I get there? And I think really one of the invitations, I think this is a little hard for the church. I think we're getting better at it in this season, like kind of the postmodern stuff. We're starting to embrace some of the good that is intended, or the way that postmodernism reacted to modernism, where there's this importance on our identity. Our identity is not the highest end, right? Like God is the highest.
Yeah.
But he created each of us, and we need to give ourselves permission to be who we are.
Yeah.
Right. Not in this kind of like shove it in people's faces, I'm just keeping it real, like, aggressive way, but in more of this exploration. And one of my favorite passages in the scriptures that the Lord just keeps bringing me back to, I really feel like it's a piece of my life's work, is the parable of the talents. What did you, the master went away for a really long time. We don't have God standing over us, holding the marionette strings, saying, first do this, and then do this, and then do this, and then do that, right?
Right.
He doesn't want that of us. He invites us to co-create in a way that I think is really, we can get uncomfortable with that level of freedom. We'll talk a lot about, well, I just want to do God's will. But if we're standing in activity, if we're not moving because we're waiting for an audible voice, then I think we're actually not in his will.
Yeah.
Unless he said, wait and stop and don't move. Just be here. That like a part of our work is to show up and love. Show up and love tomorrow. Show up and serve tomorrow. And the way that we do that is by knowing how he wired us. I think a lot of the times when we're frustrated, burnt out, irritated, agitated in the vast majority of our lives, which is how I was when I was in law, it's because we're out of order. We have not planted our feet in the right space.
Wow.
So, then the flip side of that, which was interesting, is I had to learn how to operate in joy while I was in the wrong space. Like that's the first place. We don't get a pass, right?
Right.
But it's an indicator too. It's the warning light on the car dashboard that's saying something's not right, and it's okay to fix it. It's not self-indulgent. This is actually how you're going to minister the most powerfully, is when you are in your true self and you're like connected with the Father. You love the life that you live, and then you turn around and you give it to other people and say, guess what I learned from the Lord? It's so good.
Yeah.
So I think that's the path to joy.
Yeah, there's a lot of reality to kind of centering yourself in your relationship with God, realizing who he created you to be and how he wired you. And a lot of times we get wrapped up into the world's systems that like to try to tell us who we are. Whether that be, we talked about the school system a little bit, but, there's a lot of systems, church is even one of them, that like to try to put us in a little box and tell us, well, this is what you're supposed to do. This is who you are. This is what you have to do. This is who you have to be. What are some of the most rewarding aspects of what you're doing today? And then kind of what are some of the most challenging aspects of what you're doing today?
Well, that's a great question. So I'll touch just briefly, because it won't make much sense if I don't, on my early 20s, which was, I'd been raised in a non-Christian home, and I was a type A personality. I had a lot of expectations on myself, and I was trying to be to do it all for God. And reached a real point of crisis in my mid-20s where I was like, I'm out. Like, I don't know how to fix my life. I had some like just mental personality, just challenges. Like I didn't grow up just kind of innately knowing how to relate to people, but I was very highly relational, just not a very healthy individual. And so I hit a point in my mid-20s of just a deep rock bottom where I didn't want to live anymore. I didn't have any plans, but I was like, can you just take me out, Lord? Can we just be done? Because I don't know where to go from here.
Wow.
And so there was of just really healing. And it actually did start with I remember I was doing an internship, really struggling. And for the first time in my life since I'd really started walking with the Lord, I did what I wanted to do, which was watch the Wonder Years reruns for for weeks. That's all I did. But it was the first time I gave myself permission to not like quote unquote work on myself or dig deep into some sort of, spiritual formation thing because there was something wrong with me because I was so broken in my own view. And so that was the beginning of what I call my love story with the Lord. So I'm 41 now, and to have gone from there to this place where, 18 years later, I guess, I'm now able to give to others what I've received is just the biggest high. Like, it's such a joy to say, and I feel like the Lord says to through whatever I give to you, I want to give through you to other people. So, what's my life's work? It's whatever He gave me, right? Which is a lot of different stuff. And so similarly, when people ask, what do you do? I'm like, well, about 4 things for money. And then there's all the things that people call me for that aren't for money. And then there's my family. And then there's the homeschool. But they're all things I really love. And there's a lot I don't do. Like my husband, bless him, cooks. Because otherwise at 5 o'clock, I'm just barely coming out of my office. I don't know, pizza? I don't know. And so, there's been this journey of uncovering who I am, letting that be okay, accepting love from God and from other people, learning and growing. And so now to be able to look at someone else and say, I know there's a purpose behind all of this. Yeah. And you are fearfully and wonderfully made. And I know it because of where I came from. Yeah. So that's the best. That's the biggest gift.
Yeah, I get you. There's a lot of validity in that for sure.
Yes. So that's the joy. The challenge, I would say, is just spinning the plates. It's just, I'm an assessor. I was a lawyer. I love strategizing. I love personal development. I love spiritual growth. I feel like that's a journey that at our best, we should all just commit our lives to, of just, I will change. I'll be different tomorrow than I was today. That's kind of the point. That's part of being faithful with what we've been given. Right. We literally have the breath of God in us through the Holy Spirit. And so, we got to grow. But with that, I've got a little bit of a busy brain. I mean, maybe we call it ADHD. I don't know. I don't really do a lot of labeling, and I'm not going to take a medication to try to fix it. But man, I got to manage my head sometimes. And so I get, I have a hard time knowing where to put my hand at any given time. So, I've got these children that I love so much and I'm so devoted to. And so, making sure they get time, making sure our marriage gets time, making sure homeschool gets time. Because I will say this, homeschool and being with your children is not the same thing. Those are 2 different buckets. You have to keep them separate. And then I've got the businesses that I'm a part of. I've got a wellness business. I've got a coaching business. We've got a beach house that I'm actively involved in helping with the rentals on that. Because I love getting people to Oak Island. It's like my favorite. And then I've got a podcast as well. So, there's these different pieces. And I've found it really challenging to know, am I headed in the right direction? Because I know what I want with my family, crystal clear on my vision for, 40, 50 years out and into the generations, like what I want to see. With the business, it's less clear because it's always subordinate to this family picture. And so I think that's the biggest challenge of this season is there's this little creeping voice that goes, am I doing the right thing?
Yeah. Always. But, I think some of that's healthy, kind of constantly reevaluating. So last question I want to ask you as we wrap up. You mentioned that you want to make sure that all of these buckets get attention because those are important to you. In order to do that, you probably have to say no to a lot of things. That's something that I had to learn the hard way is that it's okay to say no. And we practice that pretty regularly these days. We're trying to protect our time together. For example, one of the things we tell our kids is that you can have one activity at a time. We've got 3 kids and it's like, all right, well, if we've got 3 kids doing 2 things all at the same time, we're never going to see each other.
Yes.
So what is your one thing going to be right now? And being able to say no to some of these other things is hard, especially for a people pleaser like myself. A lot of us are wired that way. We don't want to let people down. We don't want them to think less of us. We don't want to disappoint people. But there's a lot of value in saying no. What's been your experience with trying to protect those things that are most important to you so that you can have a life that is smaller but richer? What are your thoughts on the power of no?
Yeah. So I would say no is essential if you want to build a life by design. If you actually want to, at the end of your life, if you want to love your life, you have to say no. Okay. And Bob Goff is someone I love his writings, and he has No Thursday, I think is what he calls it, where every Thursday he says no to something. Right. And then when asked why, because it's Thursday, And so what we kind of miss is the people that are often clamoring for us the loudest are the people with the least right to do so, right? And our spouses and our kids will kind of hang back. Now our kids, it'll show in behavior, right? Like our kids will start to act out. They'll start to get really like clingy at night, or there will be clues, but they won't actually be able to verbalize, Mom, I really need more time with you than I have. Like that's a high school thing maybe. And by then they're not going to say it because, if you haven't been sewing into that bucket up until now. And so the most helpful tool that the Lord has given me around the power of no is something that I call hierarchy of covenants, which is it's God first, our spouse next, our children next, and then everyone else. But here's the key to that. So we know that order, right? The key is if a lower order covenant or lower order relationship, because it may not, we have our covenants, covenant with God, covenant with our spouse, and covenant. In my faith tradition, we have a covenant with our children through baptism. Sure. And so if a lower order relationship is intervening and disrupting a higher order covenant, a boundary is essential. So even good things like mom pops over to say, hey, and all of a sudden the kids are all excited and then family dinner goes out the window. Okay. We've all had this moment where somebody that we love stops by and now all of a sudden the plan's out of order. And it's not that we don't make space for that, but if we only have one family dinner a week and then it gets disrupted, a boundary has to be in place. I'm sorry, Mom. So glad to see you. Mondays are family dinner, or whatever it is. And it can be really light. And oftentimes boundaries kind of start to feel like a bad word when we're not actively giving ourselves permission to place the boundary, because that's when it builds up. And all of a sudden we're like, get out of the house,
Yeah.
Not that that's ever happened before, but
Hypothetically,
exactly. But when our top blows, that's a sign that we've not been listening to that still small voice over time. And so it's actually, we're able to love best when we have a natural and easy relationship with no, because then it's neutral. It's like, hey, I'd love to, that's not on my plate right now. So we fill up our hours first with God and with our spouse and with our children, and then we'll see what's left.
So much truth and wisdom that you've shared with us today, and just really appreciate you being on here, Anna. How can my listeners find out more about you? Where can they go to learn about your business, your coaching, and all of that?
Yes. Oh, I would love to connect with your people. So they can find me at sheconsidersafield.com. And I actually have a free guide that they can get there called From Overwhelmed to Overcomer that will help them clear all of the busy noise in their mind and actually move into that space of joy. So they can get that there, and I'll look forward to connecting with them. They can find me all the places from there.
Love it. And I'll include in the show notes a link to that as well. And your podcast, can you give us the name of that and where to find you there?
Keep it really simple. It's also She Considers a Field.
Yeah. No, dig into that a little bit. I'm just curious. Give me a little bit about that name.
So She Considers a Field is a reference to the passage in Proverbs 31 that says she considers a field and buys it. Yeah. And this is really the work that the Lord's brought me through, where when I left law, I was almost allergic to the part of myself that had become a lawyer. Oh, I'm never going back there. I'm home in my bathrobe all day long. Every moment is spent with my children. And I started to get real agitated because I love to think through puzzles. I love writing. I love words. I love communicating. I love coaching and helping people uncover that best version of themselves. And so I was suppressing a part of me that was very important. And I started getting a very caricature view of womanhood, of biblical womanhood, thinking that I needed to be more in the traditional, like think the 1940s housewife. And so that shift back to owning that part of myself, that there is this businesswoman in me, And what happens with the Proverbs 31 woman through all of this, through all of her work out in the marketplace, through all of her investment savvy, her children rise up and call her blessed, right? And her husband honors her in the marketplace, or however the phrase goes.
Yep.
So my mission with the podcast is really to encourage and equip women of faith. And my specialty is really homeschooling entrepreneurs, because now you're blending together these deep thinkers that also are trying to wear these two very full-time hats,
Right.
and give them tools to do it well and to be well, body, mind, and soul, which I know is your heart as well. So it's so cool that we have that alignment. But that's really my passion, is to help women who are spinning all the plates to do so in a way that feels really wholehearted and aligned with their lives.
I love that. Well, thank you so much, Anna. What a privilege this has been. Appreciate you being here with us, and look forward to all that you have to share with the world and making a difference.
Thank you, Chad. Same to you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the RevRx podcast. We hope you enjoyed what you heard today, and if so, we'd love it if you would hit that subscribe button so that you'll never miss a new episode from us. Also, feel free to leave us reviews and comments, as we'd love to hear from you. Be blessed and be the very best you.